Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
On that, let's move on to something other than Brexit, but sticking with the European Union. On the Andrew Marr show yesterday, Michael Gove, Cabinet Minister, was being quizzed about the Hungarian government and the Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Let's have a listen.
One leader who said, "We would like a fairer Brexit because we love the British and have always cooperated well. You deserve a good deal." Are you pleased to have the support of Viktor Orban of Hungary?
I think the truth is actually that there are a swathe of EU leaders who want the best possible relationship with Britain.
Let's stick with that one.
Well, I think one of the things is that I'm not a, what's the word? It's not for me to rank a league table of EU leaders and to say that one is my favourite or that one I have less time for, because I believe in cooperative diplomacy. I believe in generosity of spirit towards our EU partners.
James, does the government not have a view on the Viktor Orban government that's deemed to be authoritarian and anti-immigrant?
Well, Michael wasn't being asked about the UK government's view on that. He was asked about the vote in the European Parliament.
No, he was asked actually about Viktor Orban, and I'm asking you now. What's your view about Viktor Orban and the government that he has in Hungary?
My view as a Conservative is that I am a big fan of freedom of speech, freedom of the press, protection from minorities in both word and deed, and therefore, on a personal level, I'm uncomfortable with some of the decisions that Viktor Orban's government has made. But the point that, if I remember rightly, that conversation was about a European Parliament vote rather than our just general philosophy to governments around the world.
Right, but he was asked about Viktor Orban himself, and actually on this programme on Friday, Danny Finkelstein, the Conservative peer, called the fact that some MEPs, Tory MEPs in fact, were whipped to vote against the censure of that government. He called it shameful. It's not defensible. It's a really distressing thing to have happened, and it's hypocritical of them to have done this, yes, and a big mistake of judgment. Do you agree with Danny Finkelstein?
Well, my understanding is that the reason that they voted against the censure motion was to uphold what has been the EU's explicit position of not interfering or taking a view on the domestic politics of the member state governments. Now, as I say, my view on what's going on in Hungary is the view that I have, but that's not to say there is an automatic and obvious read across to the actions of the
Do you think that's defensible?
European parliamentarians.
No, I don't at all. I'm sorry, James. Look,
No.
Fascism doesn't rock up wearing goose-stepping and wearing high-heel boots. It comes through a slow process of normalising extreme behaviour, and that is exactly what Orban is doing. And it's also hypocritical, frankly, for you to say that about the government, because I'm on the Council of Europe, and at the moment we are trying to resist the attempts of Russia to rejoin the Council of Europe. So actually we do take part in international organisations, and that's a cross-party piece of work that we're doing, challenging Russia's status in the Council of Europe.
Yeah, the Council of Europe's not the European Union.
But like, your point that somehow we don't get involved, that we don't... I mean, that was an opportunity...
No, that's not what I said. I was very specific.
James,
no, it wasn't. The EU's philosophy of subsidiarity dictates that they don't attempt to interfere or take a view in domestic politics.
When this man is restricting democracy in his country, when he's actively agitating anti-immigrant sentiment, when he's working Matteo Salvini, I mean, there is a rise of a far-right view across Europe. At what point do we stand up for the values that we are supposed to espouse in the UK?
That's a completely different topic.
But Michael Gove had an opportunity, didn't he, as a Conservative politician?
He was being asked about the actions of the European parliamentarians, and the philosophy that underpinned their actions it basically goes to the heart of the foundation of the EU, of subsidiarity, of not intervening or commenting on domestic politics.
So what is your government doing to stand up for the rights of people in Hungary?
Well, you're jumping about. Were we talking about the European parliamentarians or not?
Well, he was asked for a comment. I mean, why is it difficult for a Conservative politician to do what you've just done and state your position on what the government there is doing?
Michael wasn't being asked about his position. He was being asked about the actions of the European parliamentarians.
I think you have to be absolutely firm in condemning encroachment on human rights in a country that is part of the EU, and we are still part of the EU. Even when we're not, we should comment without fear or favour. And it's not really right to say the EU doesn't get involved in these ways. The EU has been trying to think of the best ways to respond, for example, to the Polish government, which tried in a very serious and unpleasant way to undermine the independence of the judiciary. And the EU stepped in and cracked down on them and penalised them. So it's right for the EU to do that, because if it's not a club of nations which enforce democratic values, then what is its purpose?
Right, let's talk about the
Can I
Liberal...
just make a small point?
Yes, go on.
About this? I mean, there are two wrong things being talked about here. I have no sympathy for Viktor Orban, or indeed for the Kaczynski government in Poland. But on the other hand, I do very much oppose the interference in the internal affairs of sovereign states by others, and I don't think that one is the excuse for the other. And you shouldn't try and justify one wrong thing by the other. And the Council of Europe is the opposite of the European Union. It's never intended to be a supranational, or set out to be a supranational body, and that's one of the reasons why it can comment on these things. The problem with the European Union is that it might well start interfering physically in the internal affairs of another country. And I think most of us would find that pretty repulsive, wouldn't we?
All right, let's leave it there.
Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban has accused European Union leaders of making serious historic mistakes, declaring that they've been unable to keep the UK in and unable to keep migrants out. The accusation comes after MEPs backed action against Hungary on Wednesday over its alleged attacks on democracy and the rule of law. A standing ovation for the woman who made the case against Hungary, when a Green Dutch MEP accused Viktor Orban's government of posing a systematic threat to EU values. More than two-thirds of MEPs agreed with her. They backed a motion to start a process that could lead to political sanctions against Hungary, including the loss of voting rights, the first time the EU has done so against a member state ever. The Hungarian government retorted, calling it a witch hunt and a fraud.
Hungary will not accede to this blackmailing. Hungary will protect its borders, stop illegal migration, and will defend its rights.
Since Mr. Orban came to power 8 years ago, his government has been accused of a whole slew of charges, including curbing judicial independence and cracking down on press freedoms. He won a resounding election victory earlier this year with a campaign that focused on the invasion of migrants, even though they stopped coming 2 years ago, and alleged interference from the billionaire and ethnic Hungarian George Soros, whose foundation has now been forced to move to Berlin. Hungary is also accused of abusing asylum seekers' rights and migrants. It built a fence, several fences actually, to keep migrants out, claiming that they posed a threat to the country's and indeed Europe's national security. Budapest believes that the political tides are in their favour, with right-wing anti-immigration parties on the rise just about everywhere in Europe. Mr. Orban, who prides himself on what he calls Hungary's illiberal democracy, has now challenged President Macron to a political duel. "We are fighting for the soul of Europe," he declared. "Bring it on," President Macron retorted. Well, earlier I was joined by Prime Minister Orban's spokesman Zoltán Kovács and began by asking him whether the EU's Parliament's decision to censor Hungary was upsetting.
Well, we'll see how that much is going to hurt the European Parliament and European institutions. You have to know that...
that sounds like a threat.
It's not a threat, it's just describing the fact and what really happened on the ground, because eventually, after 8 years of trying to take revenge and continue with the witch hunt against Hungary, the European Parliament has finally found a way around its own rules to condemn us. So if it's a victory, we don't know. If it's history, we'll see.
A witch hunt against Hungary. And what the European Parliament is saying is that you're trampling on some core European values.
Well, in that respect, you have to remind the viewers that it's not the European Parliament's authority to decide on that.
Your Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, describes the system you have in Hungary as an illiberal democracy. Isn't that a contradiction in terms?
Not at all. Especially in Europe, democracy has always taken different faces. Social democrats, liberals.
But an illiberal democracy?
Yes, that means non-liberal. And this is simply a refutation or a refusal of a worldview, if you like, which is trying to monopolize everything around you. Here we go in the UK. I mean, this is a country for a great conservative tradition, and vindicating that all that you see around is just the achievement of liberals and maybe Labour would be equally misleading. So that's why we fight against this perception, which is trying to suggest that there's only one way of interpreting the truth and reality around you, and that is liberalism.
I was thinking more in terms of liberal as in meaning free.
take a look at the usage of the term and word, and which is denying others, say Christian Democrats, we consider ourselves Christian Democrats, to have an equal footing if it's about a political or ideological debate. And that's why the decision of the European Parliament, allegedly liberal, is basically about trying to wipe out other political ideas or ideologies.
If the European Union is vexing you so much at the moment with Article 7, amongst other things, if you don't agree with its migration policy as well, why don't you just, prepare the path to leave, do what Britain's doing?
Because we have always belonged to the European community or family of states. We've been fighting very hard, actually, for almost 50 years under communism to get back to where we belong to. And any attempt that would like to exclude us, any witch hunt, any revenge are not going to falter us.
I covered the Hungarian election campaign, and I was struck by the fact that there were two issues that you really emphasized. One was the so-called invasion of migrants, and the other one, which is really intriguing, was consistent opposition to George Soros, the Hungarian-born philanthropist billionaire. Am I right in thinking that your Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, and indeed you yourself, studied at Oxford University with money from the Soros Foundation?
You're right, and that's what exactly the difference is. Back at the fall of communism, there was a common cause we fought for. And bringing down communism cannot be compared bringing down a democratically elected government. And this is indeed our problem with Mr. Soros. We face here a democracy problem. We strongly believe that real democracy is based on the will of the people, and that is a mandate coming from democratic elections and not from financiers and billionaires who have lots of money.
We've got the European elections coming up in May. Do you see these European elections as the real duel for the soul of Europe?
In many respects, yes. This is the first elections where there's going to be one global, if you like, European-wide issue, which cannot be avoided, and that is migration, illegal migration, and all questions that relate to it. The future of Europe much depends on how we answer that challenge.
Michael Gove, he kind of intimated that the reason why Tory MEPs didn't vote to censure Hungary in the European Parliament was that they were hoping for payback from Hungary when it comes to approving a Brexit deal. Are you going to do this government, our government, that favour?
We are going to pay it back, if you like, with all respect, actually, that is required here. If there's a fair deal, we are going to vote for it.
So they've got your vote?
Again, if there's a fair deal, that's what we are, and that's everybody should be looking for, we are going to vote for it.
Zoltán Kovács talking to me earlier.